we're going to start talking about something called the principles of design. These are techniques and tools that you can use to make your artwork a little bit more interesting to look at. And if you can really try to think about these as you're making your art, in the end result, it'll be a more successful piece. So first, let's talk about what they are. We already learned about the elements of art. Those are little things that we can focus on within our art, and the way that we put them together becomes the principles of design. So in general, there are 8 principles of design that we'll learn about: balance, rhythm, unity, variety, movement, emphasis, proportion, and scale. So they're just techniques that we can use to try to make our art more interesting, so that way it holds attention and you can help to have a little bit easier time communicating what you want to communicate in your art. The first one we're going to talk about is something called emphasis. Emphasis is all about having one thing that stands out in the art that somebody's going to really focus in on and notice first. So when we're looking at the artwork on this slide, you'll probably look towards that center blue circle that's in the very middle of the artwork. And that's because it's showing emphasis. The blue really stands out against the green, and that little yellow portion that's around the blue helps to kind of emphasize it and make it show up. We also have all those little lines that are drawing your attention in towards the middle of the artwork. So we're trying to make something be noticed first, so that way it holds attention and somebody's going to really notice it. Here's another example. When you look at this one, you'll probably notice that little black boat that's on the top of the artwork. And there's a reason for this. It stands out as being different from the rest. We have all this aqua blue going on with the water section of the artwork. And that boat just really stands out because it's a dark black compared to it. But also, kind of the size of things is different. We have a large space being used up by the blue water versus a real small amount of space used by the boat. The next one we're going to talk about is something called unity. Unity is how much you can have in an artwork that's the same. So the more that you have that's the same, the more you're showing unity. It kind of gives us this feeling of harmony and simplicity. We were repeating that same thing over and over again. But you also can have unity by having something really close together. So the proximity, which is how close something is, can create unity as well. Here's an example. This is a paper sculpture, and it's hanging from the ceiling there in a studio space in a gallery. And all of the paper is the same color. And that's creating a lot of unity. But also, they're all lined up. And it looks like that close proximity of the paper to itself creates unity too. Next one we're going to talk about is something called rhythm. So rhythm is created by repetition of something that repeats over and over and over again. So in this example, we have that same bird shape that is cut out from this feather, and it's repeated over and over and over again. You can create rhythm by having the same thing repeated, like maybe something that's the same color or shape or texture. But a lot of times it has to do with the spacing between things. So if you have things that are equally spaced out, we're going to have something called regular rhythm going on. If you have something that changes in its distance, so as it's closer to you, it's larger, and then as it's further away, it's smaller. You might have that repetition going in a progressive kind of way. But you could also have a random rhythm going on where you have the same thing repeated, but there isn't any rhyme or reason to how it shows up. Here's an example of some rhythm. Balance is our next one. This is showing balance in a physical sense because we have the sculpture that it's if one was a different direction or weight than the other for these horses, it would likely fall over. So we have that physical sense. But you could also think about balance in a way where it's equally spaced. So we've got something that's the same on one side as it is on the other. So we have something called symmetry going on, in an artwork. So here's an example of balance. Now, if you were to view this from above, we have something called radial balance going on, where we have a central point. And if you look on either side of that point in any direction, you're going to see something repeated in the same way. So trying to make something that you have a physical sense of evenness or actually symmetry going on in the artwork is going to be using something called balance. The next one we're going to talk about is something called variety. So variety is having a lot of difference in an artwork. So the more difference that you have, the more you're showing variety. And sometimes variety can be a great way to make somebody really hold their attention because they're noticing all the differences and they're comparing different things within the artwork to see the differences. You could have variety through color, texture, lines, space, through a lot of different elements of art. So in this artwork, we've got a lot of different color being used. We've got different value. We've got all sorts of different things going on in it. Here's variety through the use of color. The next one is something called movement. Okay, so movement can be viewed in a couple different ways with our sculptures that we're making. You can create implied movement, where it looks as though you might have captured or created something that is in its frozen in time, basically, and creating some movement that way. Or you can even make it so that somebody's eyes move around in a sculpture. So it might start in one spot and then move to another and then to another, and you're just creating movement through somebody's eyes as they're looking at your art. But you could also think about it by actually having something that is really moving in a sculpture and it continues to move, like a kinetic sculpture. Kinetic stands for movement, and you could create a sculpture that is meant to actually be moving while somebody is viewing it. This is a link in the presentation where you can click open and see a kinetic sculpture that was at the State Fair a number of years back. But this boat moves with this mechanism underneath it, and as it moves, the sail goes back and forth on the sculpture. So it was a kinetic sculpture. The next thing we're going to talk about is something called proportion. So proportion is when we're viewing something and we're comparing our concept of that thing in real life to how it is viewed in the sculpture. So we might have a sculpture of a person and we're noticing how the size of the head compared to the hands is a little bit off than what it would be like in real life. So in this example, the head is just really in a different kind of view compared to the body and compared to the hands. The proportion is not lifelike, so we'd probably say it's out of proportion. But if we're representing something and we're making it very lifelike, we'd look to see how we could make it as exact as possible for the size relationships within it. So here's another example of things being out of proportion. If you cover up this picture so you just view half of it at the same time, it probably look pretty proportional. But then if you uncover that right-hand side of the image and you look at it, you'd really notice how things are warped, so it's become out of proportion. Scale has to do with the size relationship between different objects within a sculpture, or even of the sculpture compared with the space that it's put in. So my example on this slide is the famous cherry and spoon sculpture that you can view over at the Walker Art Center Sculpture Garden. And this is an object that would normally be something you could fit in your hand, and it's been made much larger than it is in real life. And that is a use of scale, but scale on a large size. You can also view sculptures that have been made very, very small compared to the real object and how it would be viewed in real life. And that would be scale in the opposite sense, like this example here, where a sculptor had taken a pencil and carved it into a train that looks like it's coming out of a tunnel. But this is scale in a real small sense. That finishes up the principles of design. Now, if you can think about trying to use one of these as your main focus in a sculpture, it's going to serve a purpose in really helping somebody to hone in on it and really understand the meaning that you want to have come through in your art.